Hello guys and welcome back. I hope you're doing really well. Today I'm going to be talking about the book The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Turton it is, yeah. I picked this book up in the beginning of April. I remember hauling it in my book haul video. And yeah, I've read it now. I had a lot of books to go through, but I've read it now and I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on it. I am feeling super hot at the moment and I can't even open my window because there's a lot of noise outside, but I'm just boiling. It doesn't help that I'm wearing this, but it's like actually perfect when you have the window open, but yeah. Anyway, talking about the book and how I'm going to review it. As per usual, I am going to recap the story in what I hope is a really short and concise way, but it's me, so who knows. And then I'm going to talk about why I like the book, why I didn't like the book, and I guess what I thought about the book. We're going to go with that. So, The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle is a murder mystery thriller novel. I think I've said this before a lot of the times, but I'm not really an avid reader of thriller and mystery, crime, all these sorts of things. I dip into them every now and then, and I just simply happened to pick this up because it has been heavily publicised and it was part of like this Kindle deal that was on in this newsletter that I read, and it was just going for a decent price. I thought, why not pick it up? So the back of the story tells you that a murder happened, and it's the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, and essentially the main character has 7 days to figure out who killed this woman. However, it's not your traditional, you know, you've got 7 days, you're going to solve this crime. Every single day this guy wakes up in a different body and he has to put the pieces together from all the different things that he's learned while he's been in past bodies and solve the crime. The book actually sounds really interesting because, you know, the added element of being in a different person all the time is really good. Like, that's what makes it a bit more thrilling and a bit more exciting. So the book actually opens up with this guy, Aidan, who's our main character, in the body of Sebastian Bell. So every time he goes into a different body, it's called a host. So the first host he has is Sebastian Bell. He wakes up in a forest. There's someone running after a woman named Anna. He hears a gunshot and assumes this woman is dead. And then, so yeah, straight away you're thrown into the mystery, and then the story continues from there. He has their host bodies, I think, up until the midnight of that same day. And after that, he loses their body, but he still continues to keep all the knowledge that he's learned from the previous person. What is happening in the story is Aidan needs to solve the crime to be able to leave this area that they're in called Blackheath. I think it's in a place called Blackheath Manor, which is in like an area that's called Blackheath. There's a party going on, a whole bunch of guests have been invited, and then the murder occurs. So by being in different people's bodies, he's able to sort of pinpoint maybe who killed her, find out the motive and things like that. So he's a guest there, and that's what he's there to do. But also worth noting, there are 2 other characters in the book as well who are also trying to solve this murder. However, these characters for some reason only have the one host, and they only have the 1 day to solve the murder, which is beyond unfair. And those characters are in the bodies of Anna, which is a maid, and then another guy called Daniel Coultridge, who is a guest at the party. There are also 2 other characters in this book. So one is a footman, and I think the other is some sort of bird. I can't remember what he is now, sorry. Who is the one that's helping Aidan and sort of feeding Aidan clues. The huntsman is just like this random person in the book who's just trying to kill Aidan, basically. I don't really know why. Maybe they did explain in the book, but I couldn't understand or find a reason why. It just seemed like there's this murder mystery you have to solve, and by the way, there's an axe murderer running around. And that is basically the story. The story is about then 500 pages of us being in different hosts. So the host that I can remember, he wakes up as Sebastian Bell, who is a doctor. He wakes up as like a painter, who is the guy that's actually accused of another crime within the book, but not the crime to do with Evelyn's death. He wakes up as a detective. He wakes up as a guy who's quite young, but this guy is also a rapist. He wakes up as a really severe obese man. He wakes up as a really old man. So yeah, you're then fast forwarded through 500 pages of him being in these different bodies, him meeting Anna, who at first he thinks is on his side, but then is soon told that she's not on his side. He doesn't meet the host of Daniel Coultridge until later, but obviously he then knows that he's got the 7 days to solve it, whereas these 2 only have the 1 day. And only one person can be freed from this like sort of essentially time loop that they're going through. So the first person to give the guy who's like, I guess, the games master, the answer of who killed Evelyn Hardcastle gets freed from this game loop, essentially. As the story progresses and Aidan becomes all these different characters, it seems that the more he goes through the different hosts, the more he loses himself, and he has to really struggle to find himself within these hosts. And it's really interesting, actually, because the way Stuart writes it is that as he moves from host to host, the other hosts are still there with him in a way, and they're all sort of peering through this new person's eyes and seeing how the world is through their eyes. So one of the big sort of mysteries, I guess, this is a spoiler, in the book, is that this isn't actually a game. It turns out, once Aidan finds out who the murderer of Evelyn Hardcastle is and he gives the answer, he's actually free to go, and the sort of games master guy tells him, like, this is actually a prison, like a rehabilitation centre. And it's at that point you're like, wow. However, I was too fatigued by the book at this point to be like, oh my god, wow. This is a crime that has actually not been solved. So what they do is they get prisoners to solve the crime for them, but whilst also seeing if they have been rehabilitated. So they're obviously thrown into different scenarios, and it's how they react to those scenarios that they're able to tell if they have been rehabilitated. I think it's a very interesting concept because they only give the prisoners 1 day. The reason why Aidan has 7 is because he's not actually a prisoner. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's actually someone who's volunteered to come into this sort of, I guess, game and experiment place because he wanted to see one of the prisoners in there. He wanted to seek revenge on her because she killed his sister. So that's when you find out a bit of a interesting part, and you're like, oh, this is a bit interesting. So now at this point, Aidan is free to go because out of the 3, he's the one that's given the answer for who killed Evelyn Hardcastle. However, Aidan has a suspicion that actually this murder isn't what it seems it is. And he wants to save Anna because he's made a pact with her. And it was at this point I lost it with Aidan. I had enough, and I'd had enough of the book because he goes back in there. And I remember just putting the book down like, I've had enough. And this was about the 82% mark, so I read it on my Kindle. So the rest of the story goes that he goes back in, manages to save Anna, and they actually manage to find out who the real killer of Evelyn Hardcastle is. And basically Evelyn Hardcastle isn't even dead. She is like the mastermind behind all of this. And there's so much I haven't said about the book because I feel like if you want to read the book, there's so many twists and turns that you'll be taken through that even the little bit that I've revealed is really nothing in comparison to the whole book. The book has a lot of spoilers and it's really well thought out. So it ends with him and Anna being released, and he's basically trying to say that, I know her. Like, he's obviously spent the past 30 years, by the way, in this 7-day loop. So he feels like he knows her and he feels like she's rehabilitated, even though he can't remember past those 7 days. One would hope after 30 years maybe you are rehabilitated, but who knows. And that's how the book ends, and yeah, we can see that I wasn't very impressed with the book. So now I'm going to move on to how I thought about the book. I really gave such a brief rundown of the book because so much happens in this book. This book is about like time travel. It's a murder mystery. It's throwing in some bits of prison rehabilitation. It's got a lot, and you're going through 7 days in the bodies of 7 different people. Like it's a lot. If you read this book, which I do think people should read it, like you'll be astounded by how much has gone into it. I think I read at the end it took this author about 10 years to put this all together, which I'm not surprised at because it's not a complicated book, but it has the potential to be a complicated book, but he's narrated it and put it all together in such a good way that it's not complicated to read. So what did I think of the book? I gave this book a 2 out of 5. I think I would have given it a 3 out of 5 because 3 for me is like, yeah, it's okay, but I'm basing this on the Goodreads system, and it's okay in Goodreads is 2 out of 5, which feels a bit low, but I don't know. The reason I gave it a 2 out of 5 is because I was just so fatigued by the story. I got to 82%, which is the bit where Aidan decides he's going to go back into it, and I'd had enough. Had everything else that came after the story been within the first bit, it would have been fine. The story went on for too long, in my opinion, and for me, I don't know if this is a thing, but I just felt like I experienced reader's fatigue. I was exhausted by the story and all these twists and turns it was bringing out, and I was just like, dude, it's really not that deep. I was really impressed with the characters and the character development, and how when he goes into the different bodies of these characters, like Stuart really took the time to like develop these characters. When he's the obese man, like he talks about how different his body is to walk in and the weight of his body and how this guy feels. And it's interesting because even though he's Aidan, he still carries a lot of the characteristics of the people he's embodying. So when he then moves on to be like the old man, it's astounding the way he talks about his body then. Like, even though it's old, he says he feels a lot more free. I felt that it was so real, like I could really imagine it myself, and I thought that was actually quite powerful because he really had to take the time to give these characters a real life of their own and really develop their history as well. So that was one of my favourite bits. My favourite character was the detective, simply because I feel like he's the one that had the most sort of, not even common sense, that's his job. So his job was to look for different clues, and I really feel like it was good he had one person that was in that line of business that could actually look at things and be like, okay, this is XYZ. I found that there was the potential, and I think maybe because I persevered through this book, but had I been in another state of mind, maybe I would have found this annoying, but there was really the potential for the book to be very confusing. There were a lot of characters in the book. I didn't mind the host, but then it was throwing in other people who weren't really anything, so then you weren't sure if he was then going to be in their body at some other point. And there were loads of little side stories, like the fact that the murder of Evelyn isn't even the murder of Evelyn, and that she's committed a horrific crime all the way back in the day, and it was all a jumble of things going on. And I thought the bit about the whole thing being a rehabilitation centre was very interesting, and that really did capture my interest. It actually reminds me of that episode of Black Mirror, I think it's called White Bear, where essentially that woman has committed a horrific crime and she is having to relive the same day over and over again, except she doesn't know that she's reliving it over and over again. She's just thrown into this really scary scenario, and then at the end there's all these people spectating like, you're a horrible person, and then she has to relive that day over and over again. I thought that was very interesting. But then I thought it was also a really awful way of finding out if people were rehabilitated, because they're giving them one day to solve a crime, and essentially they're testing them on how they react to, I guess, maybe that evil footman or footman coming to murder people. And I'm just like, I don't think that's a great test of rehabilitation. I feel like survival instincts would kick in, and maybe they just try to save themselves, and maybe they would lie because they don't know where they are and they've had their memory wiped, so why would that be a good test of how well rehabilitated they are? For me, I think what I really disliked was that Aidan was an annoying character. One, I didn't really feel like you saw that much of his personality when he was in the different hosts, because as we didn't know him as a character before, it's really hard to tell what is his personality and what is a character's personality. And even though he does say some things that indicate, oh, this is my personality and that's their personality, as he can't actually really remember himself fully, you can't actually trust him as a narrator. So for me, it was a bit like, oh, I don't know. I found him quite annoying, but then I didn't really know him. But when it came to the end and he made that decision to go back in, then I found him incredibly frustrating. He was just so lackluster, so ridiculous. Why would you want to go back in? You've just found out you're in this 7-day loop where someone's trying to kill you all the time. Yeah, you've met this woman and she seems really helpful, but actually really it's you from the past helping yourself, and you've put together a whole notebook and sort of cheat sheet so she's able to catch up and help you. You don't actually know her from anywhere, but because you feel like you have to save her, you're going to go back in. But then I kind of think maybe he went back in because he actually knew the murder wasn't fully solved. That I'm not too sure about. But as a character, I found Aidan incredibly irritating. Like, he just irritated me. The minute he went back in, I was like, I'm done with this guy. Like, I'm actually fed up with him. Especially because the game master essentially tells him that, I don't know if I've already said this, but he does tell him that the reason Anna is in there is because Anna killed his sister in a really horrific way, and he still decided to go back in there. If that was me, I'd be like, yeah, see you later. See you later. Maybe some people have more compassion than me, but honestly, I found him to be a very weak individual. I would have left the woman to rot there. She don't know any different. She's had a 1-day loop. I mean, I felt like after the book came from like 82%, it just threw out all these little like exciting plot lines that really should have been fed and weaved through in the middle parts. It just felt like it came to the end and he was just throwing out loads of little exciting plots, and I feel like by then you're already fatigued by the story, and now you're like, oh, okay, cool, like this is really cool, but I'm too tired to even care, and it's like near the end of the book now. Like, a lot of revelations happen towards the end of the book and you're like, what? One of the ways as well I felt like the book was trying to do too much was the fact that actually halfway through the book you kind of forget that a murder even happened. You only find out in his third host like how Evelyn's killed, which I guess is part of the way of building the suspense, but you kind of forget that there's a murder at the centre of all of this because there's so many other things going on and so many other things to sort out that you're like, oh yeah, because it keeps going back to the history. But you kind of forget that actually we're looking for the death of Evelyn. It's only as he gets into the detective body that you're a bit like, oh okay. This I feel makes the murder just seem a bit like meh, like you're not really that interested in the murder, you're not really that horrified by it, and it's like it's a murder novel, like you should be fascinated by the murder, but it becomes a sort of side story when really it's the main story. But that is all from me. I am so hot, so I'm going to have to take this off because I'm boiling to death. If you have read this book, please let me know your thoughts on it. If you've listened to the audiobook, let me know your thoughts on it. I don't know if there is an audiobook, but if there is, maybe I would listen to that, because since my last video when I talked about the audiobook of Lincoln in the Bardo, I'm a bit like, oh, could I be an audiobook convert? Maybe it sounds really great in the audiobook, because I'm sure it would be read in different characters' voices. But yeah, I really hope you enjoy this video, and please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.